This task upon ourselves to conduct this event this evening. One of the things we had to do, we had to be fair to each and every one. We went and got the list of everybody who's running for the office of committeeman. We went and got the list of everybody who's running for the office of congressman. We invited each and every candidate to attend and participate. As of this afternoon at about 4:30, I was under an assumption that Congressman Rush was going to be here in attendance, but that obviously has not materialized. So we will move on.
I think healthcare has got to be a top priority for our communities. As many of you know, we're living in a time when the economy is booming, and yet we've got a record number of uninsured. And so a lot of focus has been on HMO reform, and I think appropriately so, because I think any of us who've been dealing with HMOs know that we needed to regulate them in some fashion. Federal legislation was debated last year. At the state level, we were able to pass, due to the leadership of Mary Flowers over in the House, as well as others, we were able to pass legislation that would curb some of the worst abuses of HMO reform. But HMO reform alone does not solve the problem of, number one, folks not being insured even though they're working. Not only do we have problems with persons who are not working and thereby not having health insurance, but increasingly we've got persons whose employers don't offer them health insurance, or if they do, the benefits and co-payments are so high that people can't afford to get them. So this is an absolute crisis in terms of the uninsured. The other area where we've got a major problem is the issue of prescription drugs for seniors, because as many of you are aware, Medicare does not necessarily cover all prescription drugs for all seniors. And as a consequence, we've got too many seniors who are having to make choices between, do I buy my prescription drugs, do I pay the gas bill, do I put food on the table? That's an unacceptable situation. I think the long-term goal that we have to push for is some form of single-payer plan. I believe in universal health insurance. And I think that ultimately that is the direction that we need to move in. We're the only industrialized country in the world that does not have some form of single-payer plan. And I think that that is the direction we're going to move towards. Now, it's going to be a long-term process in moving in that direction, so we're going to have to take some incremental steps. One of the main steps that I've been looking at is a plan that I actually announced on Sunday at a press conference at a senior citizens home to ensure that we had some sort of bulk buying programs and price limits on prescription drugs for seniors as an incremental step in moving in this direction. I think the other thing that we've got to do is we've got to expand our healthcare system to make sure that all children are immediately eligible for some sort of health care. And that's an element of the Bradley plan that I strongly agree with. But I think that ultimately, if in fact we're going to move forward, we're going to have to move towards a single-payer plan, which is one of the reasons why I've been a chief sponsor of the Bernadine Amendment, a plan that would call for a constitutional amendment that the legislature in 5 years develops some form of single-payer plan.
One final question from Mr.
Well,
Hall.
I think
I'm
all
sorry.
three of these have.
Okay.
Yeah, I too believe in the universal health care situation, that some form of health care should be available to each and every individual who has been excluded. There are over 2 million children without insurance. Again, Senator Obama stated many seniors can't afford their fair share of prescription payout. I think that once in Congress, whatever new congressman-elect in November should try to get an extension on what available, an improvement and extension on whatever available health care for children and seniors in case the Democrats no longer rule the House. So while there's a chance, we should fight to certainly increase, set forth a future time limit that seniors and children will be covered under some form of universal single-paid health care.
I don't wholly agree with either one of the two proposals that are on the table. Neither one of them goes far enough. We're living in phenomenal times, phenomenal economic growth. Right now, the Congressional Budget Office in Washington, D.C. says we're going to have a $2 trillion surplus within the next 10 years. With that $2 trillion, we certainly can have health care for all of our citizens. We have identified 45 million people who are underinsured. With those dollars, we can go forward and build on what we've already started. What we started here in the state of Illinois with Kid Care, again, which I was one of the chief architects in putting together, which gives insurance to all of our children, those who are working, for those working parents who need assistance as well. We have in place already Medicare and Medicaid. We can combine those two programs and make sure that the rest of our working people and those who are not working do have health insurance. We have enough dollars to ensure that we can deal with cooperatives, allowing folks to buy insurance, those who are in lower income and middle income, so they can buy insurance at low prices. So we can do much better than what we've been doing, and we certainly need to be looking at the big picture. With $2 trillion, not only do we deal with the health care issues, but we can also put money down there to make sure that we take down the deficit. So we need a universal health care system. For the past 11 years that I've been in Springfield, I've carried legislation which have proposed those kind of initiatives. And as I stated earlier, most fights in the legislature are protracted. I have been successful in passing and having signed into law the first step of that, and that is having Kid Care, which is insurance for all of our children in this state.
One final.
What I have done in the past, again, I have been lucky, blessed, or whatever it was, that someone put me over the Appropriations Committee. And with that, contrary to what some may believe, I do have some say-so of how those dollars are brought back to our community. I think it was before you arrived, I talked about that Representative Moore and I worked very closely with the Department of Transportation, Kirk Brown, to make sure that we brought back $500 million to our district to deal with the Dan Ryan. But also in that conversation we had with him, we also said as a caveat, if these dollars are coming back, we must have people from our community working on those projects. The same way I did when they redid Stony Island Street from 76th Street to 99th Street. And they had 2 African-American crews out there working around the clock on that. But even more than that, in the district, with using my position, I was able to bring back $55 million for our community in rebuilding the south end of Lakeshore Drive, another $6 million to rebuild our Jackson Park Field House, another $4.5 million to rebuild our Rainbow Beach Field House. Now you ask, how am I going to get entrepreneurs to come back in our community? Well, one, we live in a very viable community. We also live in a community that has expressways, railway stations, and bus depots, and a good transportation network. Business will come back if we utilize those existing plans, one, the TIF districts as well as the enterprise zones. What we have not had in the past is someone who can speak to the mayor to make sure that those dollars and those programs that are already out there come back to our community. Where do we get the entrepreneurs from? We get the entrepreneurs from our own community. The 1st Congressional District has a long history of being one of the most viable communities in this country. Why is that? Because we had our own stores, we had our own merchants, and we used to shop in our own district. Well, we stopped doing that. We did that to ourselves. So we have to once again regain that pride and start supporting our own businesses so we be just as strong as Chinatown, so we be just as strong as Little Village and all those other communities where people still invest in themselves. And we also must start training our children, not just how to get a job, but how to run jobs. And we start doing that by revamping the curriculum in our education system. And that is something that the Congressman can do, in addition to working with the other units of government in that state, city, and county governments. So there are plans out here, and we have plenty of examples out here. A very good success story is right over here, and it's called Innovative Technological Systems. It's over on 103rd, right off Cottage Grove. It's a young brother, 33 years old, who started out with just a dream and had some friends, got $1 million together. This was a year ago this month. He now runs a $5 million corporation out there, and he lays wire for cable TV, for phones and everything else. And he hires 250 people out of the community. Why did he pick this community? Because his criteria for people that he wanted to work for, they had to have high school education. We know in our community we have one of the most literate communities in this city and in this country. So he knew he had a good base of people to operate from, and where he could get people that can not only do the work, but also advance in the field as he did as a young man.
I don't disagree with anything Senator Trotter said. I just wanted to, Oscar, you asked in terms of specific proposals of how a congressman can make a difference. I want to give you 3 examples of things that we could specifically be doing. Number 1, we've got a capital gap in our community. The wonderful business that Senator Trotter mentioned, the question is going to be, how does that young man then expand to the next level, right? If he wants to now take it from a $5 million business to a $50 million business, where is he going to obtain the capital? And it's absolutely vital, I think, that the Congressman's office facilitate work with the Small Business Administration and help coordinate other federal programs that ensure that venture capital and other capital formation reaches these small businesses once they're formed at a local level. So that's number 1. Number 2, we've got a marketing gap in our community. And what I mean by a marketing gap is we've got tremendous purchasing power in our communities, and yet our commercial strips don't always reflect that purchasing power. Folks end up going out to River Oaks and whatnot to shop as opposed to shopping along the commercial districts. Part of it is pride, and we've got to support our local businesses. But part of it is also that I think we haven't done a good job marketing our community to the kinds of stores and facilities that I think people would want. Again, that's something that I think if we formed an Economic Development Commission, that we could coordinate marketing the community and show the kind of purchasing power that exists locally. Finally, the last point I just want to make is we've got a technical gap in the sense that a lot of the smaller stores that are located in our commercial strips that could end up being, could grow into larger businesses, they need some basic help in terms of accounting or inventory control, etc. And one of the things that I proposed is for us to set up a commission that would have staff that could provide training to all the small businesses across the 1st Congressional District to make sure that, in fact, they got that technical support they needed to move to the next level. So I think there's some specific things that we can do to actually encourage economic development.
Mr. Roby,
And in addition to that, we need local encouragement from our aldermen and our committeemen and legislators to encourage those people who have businesses now and who want to be entrepreneurs, to encourage them to stay in our communities, to upgrade their businesses, and as Senator Obama stated, to learn how to be customer friendly, how to serve their customers, how to be price effective. And we need that from the local level primarily. We again have a lot of dollars in our community. We have a lot of people with visions and enterprise. and that encouragement should be from the local level. In addition to from Congress asserting some kinds of empowerment money and tax increments to assist those business people.
I have one.
I think there are a number of issues that are particular to women, although they affect the entire community. And let me just mention a couple that I think are a top priority. One of the things that I'm interested in at the federal level is equal pay for equal work, pay equity. We have a situation where women are still making less money than men doing the same job. And I think it's vital that we actually push through legislation at the federal level to end that practice. That would have a tremendous effect on the livelihoods of a large portion of the constituents of the 1st Congressional District. So that's number one. Number two, I think we have to focus on what is going to be a growing crisis in daycare. Because and that's true for two-parent households, but it's also true for it's especially true for single-parent households. The crisis is one that doesn't just affect welfare mothers who are trying to move into the workplace, but working folks, who because of the economy, now you've got two parents in the household working, and they're trying to figure out how do I get safe, effective, quality daycare, particularly if they have jobs that are not conventional hours. And so we need to create wraparound daycare programs. I'm pleased that we've done some work at the state level to introduce new dollars into the daycare equation. But I think we're also going to have to look at the federal level in terms of the kinds of tax breaks and tax credits that we're providing that will help facilitate the growth of more daycare dollars in the community. The only other thing I'd mention, and this is not unique to women, but I think it disproportionately affects women because they get paid less, is I think we have to look at our tax policy. Because one of the things that we've got, let me stand up so I can see you here, just finishing the last part of the question. One of the things that we have right now is a tax system that is not as helpful as it should be with respect to working people who are not making $50,000 a year, but maybe you're just making $20,000 a year. And I think that we need to do more in terms of expanding the earned income tax credit and some other tax provisions that help put more dollars into the pockets of persons in those income brackets. A lot of times these tax cuts and tax proposals come out of Congress, they're directed towards people who don't need a tax break. And what we really need to do is focus on the people who unfortunately are disproportionately women. I think if we change some of those formulas, we could end up providing some concrete help.
Mr. Roby.
I'd like to stand up, gives me a chance to stretch my legs. Again, as you know, in this city, women own probably, I believe, 80% of the properties. We're now represented in the city council. I think 18 of the 50 wards are female aldermen, alderpersons. As I have fought discrimination within the police department for 30 years, after that I fought the American Bar Association, who was trying to eliminate the sub-circuits judges, who are primarily black females. They raged a over $200,000 campaign to wipe out the sub-circuits. So I fought for women, and women are standing their own strong in this city. However, as apparently you don't feel that they're being represented in Congress, and that's what you need, is someone with a dedication to fighting discrimination and standing up for issues like women's rights, pay, health care, and those issues standing up for you in Congress. So you have to send someone there who has those passions on their mind and is very adamant about representing. So that's what you remember from March 21st.
Senator Trotter.
12 years ago, when I ran for state representative, I was running to fill the vacancy that was going to be left by Carol Mosley Braun. At that time when she was elected to Cook County Recorder of Deeds. I ran then, as I'm running now, and saying that I can do anything that Carol Mosley Braun can do except walk around in high-heel shoes. When I got down to Springfield, the women's groups and the children's groups held me to that promise because Carol carried much of that legislation. During that time, I have fostered many initiatives in dealing with women, not just their financial needs, but also their health care needs. Again, I was one of the chief sponsors of the Welfare Reform Act that made sure that we had adequate dollars in the program, and also worked with individuals to make sure that as we went from welfare to work, that we revisited and actually made up for the shortfalls that were there in the first place. Now, on the congressional level, we certainly need pay equity, but we've always needed that for women. We know, especially as we have an aging community, and our women live longer, for one, than men. And as a consequence, they're the ones getting the Social Security and getting the pensions. We need to revisit the Social Security Act, which in 1993 cut away the widows' benefits. We need to look at that again to make sure that the women who are living longer do get to live in dignity and with a good quality of life. There are many things that we need to be doing on the federal front, but there's also many things that we have overlooked. Again, you need a voice in Congress. Congress is like a smorgasbord of things there. It's like the big co-op, the big treasure island. You don't just go there looking for white bread and white milk and black pepper. You go there looking for all the good things that life has to offer. And again, we all have a right to live in dignity. And once I go to Congress, we certainly will have a voice who will be advocating for us on that behalf.
Well, I think that CHA is an example of where we could have used more leadership out of the 1st Congressional District Office. The crisis in CHA did not just happen yesterday. It didn't just happen when the mayor initially proposed his plan for consolidation of CHA. It's been going on for 20 years or 30 years. And so that's an area where I think we could have used a more proactive agenda out of our 1st Congressional District Office, because the 1st Congressional District contains a lot of public housing. There is no doubt that we have to transform public housing. I think that those who would just say, let's save public housing, probably don't live in public housing, in the sense that they would know that we have to change it. But I think that it's important as we change it to make sure that, number one, we protect residents who need housing, need affordable housing, and there's a severe crunch in terms of affordable housing in the community. And number two, as we transform it, that we make sure that we do not ruin communities that currently don't contain a lot of public housing. And I think so that's just a little preface in terms of scattered site. Part of the danger, I think, in the current plan is an over-reliance on Section 8, meaning vouchers that would allow people to go out into wherever they could find housing on the regular market with essentially a little chip that says, you turn over to your landlord. And currently, the way this typically works is that there's very little use of Section 8 in communities on the north side, in the northern suburbs, out in the western suburbs. Typically what happens is that Section 8 ends up being focused in the African American community. And if you end up having a reconcentration of poverty as a consequence of too many Section 8 folks in one neighborhood, that neighborhood potentially transforms itself to the detriment not only of the residents living there, but also the folks moving in are basically just transporting the same situation they were moving from. So, my specific response is that I think that we have to, before HUD approves the CHA transformation plan, I think we've got to have a very specific plan as to how are we going to finance the construction of affordable housing, number one. Number two, how do we make sure that the affordable housing that is constructed is not just located in Chatham or South Shore or a handful of African American communities, but is fairly distributed all across the region. That's number two. Number three, what kinds of dollars are we putting in to make sure that we're training residents as they move out of public housing into neighborhoods so that they know how to keep up their property, and also so that they have opportunities to obtain jobs that allow them then to enter into the mainstream of the community and embody some of the values of the community. So I think until you've got those three parts in place, I think HUD should look very carefully at the CHA plan.
My opinion is that I support public housing scattered site. I support subsidies. I believe that certainly in order for communities to welcome scattered site housing and subsidized housing new into their communities, they want to work with those new people as far as their ability to manage their properties and address themselves to the community. Certainly concentrations there have been concentrations of scattered site housing and subsidies in South Shore community, and some of those areas are under distress because of that. However, those subsidized housings and subsidies should be scattered over more than just South Shore, a few in Brownsville, Inglewood, wherever they're available. And the needs of the people who are to occupy those should be addressed by kinds of indoctrinating them to how to manage and care for those properties and to get along with those people who have properties that are fair market.
Senator Carter.
You know, there's this saying in Springfield that we use often. It's actually an acronym. It's called NIMBY. It's not in my backyard. You know, and that's sort of what we're addressing here. Individuals who now reside in public housing. Those individuals at HUD 35 years ago who designed them and built them and thought about who should live in them were basically a group of racist individuals. Many of those individuals right now who are now dismantling them and trying to figure out what to do with those residents there are of that same mindset. We have not had much input in the process, and in that, the incumbent congressman is guilty, because though he wasn't there when they were built, he certainly should have a role in dismantling them and ensuring that those residents that reside in the 1st Congressional District, and if those residents that do not reside now, that may go to the scattered housing site, that they are equally distributed throughout the whole community. What it is, we have a community responsibility to our friends, in some instances, our relatives, and ensuring that they are equal partners in all the good that this country has to offer. And if that means that we do it all the time, we invite people over from other countries. So you're having little problems over there in Bosnia, come over here, I'm going to give you a home. Right now, we are stealing a baby from Cuba, bringing them here, trying to make this child be part of our morals and our value system. Well, when we do that for other people, we also should do that for our own folks. But there needs to be a better formula in which these scattered house-sized sites are configured and placed. Because what will have, and nothing else, we will create other ghettos. We will create an environment in which no one really wants to live in. But yet and still, we must have them because everyone needs a good quality of life, and a good quality of life means you have a good place to live and raise your children and allow the same opportunities. It is no different from when many of us who moved from the South came here. Many of us have used those opportunities that we've been given and have prospered. It is now time for all of us in our neighborhoods to reach out and take those other folks who have not used or have not had the same opportunities and make them part of our community and go from there.